On April 2, 1994, Squaresoft released the 6th game in the Final Fantasy series, the third one in 4 years, the biggest adventure yet, and one of the most beloved games of the 16-bit era. Strike up the band and get a front row seat for the story of Final Fantasy VI. When Final Fantasy VI went on sale in Japan on that second day of April in 1994, publisher Squaresoft, the development team behind the game, and the fans at home had already been on an amazing ride. Following the successes of the first 3 Final Fantasy games, the series moved to the Super Famicom, where 16 bits meant more colors, better sounds, and larger memory, all of which delivered more realistic worlds and a richer experience compared to earlier installments. While Final Fantasy IV, released in 1991, and V in 1992, led the way, the early years of the 16-bit era also saw entries from other Squaresoft series, Saga, Mana, and Hanjuku Hero, while the spin-off Mystic Quest, known as Final Fantasy USA, provided a large stable of games for everyone to enjoy. The popularity of Final Fantasy led to series creator Hironobu Sakaguchi being promoted to executive vice president of the company in 1991. He stayed in his usual role to direct Final Fantasy V, but during 1992 and afterwards, balancing multiple tasks proved too difficult, forcing Hironobu to step back, being credited mostly as executive producer or supervisor for all games starting in 1993. A stark contrast from his more hands-on days not that long before. When Final Fantasy VI was in the earliest development stages, beginning in 1992, the reins were passed on to Yoshinori Kitase and Hiroyuki Ito, serving as directors of the game. Yoshinori drew on his experiences as a field planner and scenario designer, while Hiroyuki created the active time battle system in 4 that stayed with the series for years afterward. Together, the two directors crafted a balance of story progression and in-game action that, when done right, gave Squaresoft games that certain charm. Artwork and graphic design were also divvied up between more contributors than ever before. While Yoshitaka Amano had always been the main force behind the character designs and artistic style of the series, in 6, a core team of 5 artists worked together, leading to more characters, enemies, sprites, and backgrounds than ever before, often created independently. One aspect of the series remained unchanged: music. Nobuo Uematsu continued as the sole composer. When it was all put together, major improvements were made over Final Fantasy IV and V. Development of these games started before the Super Famicom even went on sale. Drawing from 3 years of experience and 7 releases overall, Squaresoft learned the ins and outs of the Super Famicom hardware, and in Final Fantasy VI, it shows. Character sprites are now bigger and more proportionate than past games. Larger bodies led to smaller heads, looking more realistic and less cartoonish than before. Each character sprite has more color, adding more detail. The backgrounds feature more animation. Things are always in motion. Layers of fog, smoke, clouds, water, and light add more atmosphere. Some areas are almost photorealistic, all which makes the world of Final Fantasy VI very lifelike. Mode 7 effects were used throughout, most notably when flying the airship, which is now in 3D for the first time. Other minor graphical touches, such as the gradients in text boxes, make everything in Final Fantasy VI stand out against 4 and 5, showing how much improvement can be made in such little time. When the Super Famicom debuted in 1990, one touted feature was the ability to display 256 colors on screen at once. Despite the high number at the time, not one single game ever reached that full amount until Final Fantasy VI, the first game to meet the 256 color limit. The soundtrack featured 61 songs and is several hours in length, with many works timed to cinematic scenes within the game. Many characters have their own themes, and for the first time, simulated voices were used in what became one of the game's most famous scenes, the Opera House solo. Gameplay was improved to reduce the redundancy and monotony role-playing games often suffer from. In addition to the active time battle system, invented to give fighting more excitement, quick time events made their debut in 6. In battles, one character, Sabin, can perform blitz attacks using button combinations, similar to secret moves in fighting games. Other quick time events involve choices the characters make, how to maneuver through mazes, or saying the right things in a certain order. Other challenges require getting things done under a set time limit. Characters can equip relics that offer new commands, allowing for more strategy in battles, instead of just attacking without thought. In the field, relics can have other effects: faster walking speed, boosting experience, or reducing random encounters. All of it brings more action and variety into a series and genre that was often very slow and tedious. The world of Final Fantasy VI also stands as a break from tradition, evoking 19th century Europe during the Industrial Revolution. Machinery and technology are a central focus of the game. The names of characters and locations are influenced or inspired by the Italian and German languages. The concept of rebirth is a constant in the game, as the characters set in their modernity relearn their lost history. All of it stands as a contrast to earlier games, which were set in a vague time that fell somewhere between antiquity and the Middle Ages. One more change to the standard formula was made. Final Fantasy VI had no leading rule. There are 14 different characters overall, with the main character changing several times. The game often breaks into 2 or 3 paths that can be completed in any order, and except for a few certain instances, the party is completely customizable. This came as a result of a rule that Final Fantasy once had, where odd-numbered games would focus on character customization, while even-numbered games had characters that could not change abilities. Having no star to the game gave the player many options while adhering to this rule, allowing the story to have a slice-of-life feel to it, watching the comings and goings of the people of this world, rather than seeing things through the eyes of just one character. It all came together in an amazing way over the course of about 16 months. Not just the next Final Fantasy, but a new Final Fantasy, an evolution. A game that was a product of a company that had risen to the top, with a staff that was now a mix of veteran, rookie, and somewhere in between, on hardware that was reaching its limits, for an audience that expected greatness. On April 2nd, 1994, the world of Final Fantasy VI would open for all to see.
Yumeじゃない。ファイナルファンタジー6、4月2日、スーパーファミコンで発売。スクエア。
Long ago, the War of the Magi reduced the world to a scorched wasteland, and magic simply ceased to exist. 1,000 years have passed. Iron, gunpowder, and steam engines have been rediscovered, and high technology reigns. But there are some who would enslave the world by reviving the dread destructive force known as magic. Can it be that those in power are on the verge of repeating a senseless and deadly mistake? As word traveled about the rebirth of magic, 2 Imperial soldiers, Biggs and Wedge, escort a young woman to the city of Narshe in search of an Esper, one who can use magic, frozen in ice. When Biggs and Wedge discover her, the encounter causes an explosion, killing the soldiers and freeing the woman from her slave crown. Upon awakening, she has few memories beyond her name, Terra. The guards of Narshe go door to door looking for her, only to be able to escape thanks to the help of Locke, a member of the Returners, a rebel faction opposed to the Empire. During the escape, Locke and Terra encounter Mog, a mogul who helped the two to safety with the aid of his friends. It is here where Terra's memories start to awaken. She was being controlled by Kefka, the first mage of the Empire, who harnessed her abilities through a mechanical suit known as Magitech armor. Terra and Locke escape to Figaro, ruled by the womanizing King Edgar, who, upon meeting Terra, offers to hide her from Kefka. While Figaro and the Empire are allies on paper, Edgar and Locke are actually on the same page. When Kefka fails to find Terra, he sets Figaro Castle ablaze. The returners flee the scene, while the castle transforms and disappears under the sand. After the escape, Edgar's twin brother, Sabin, reunites with him after a falling out years before to join the fight, while Terra meets with Banon, the leader of the returners, to explain all that she knows. Banon urges a return to Narshe to communicate with the frozen Esper. That wouldn't be a problem, except that the Empire has discovered their location. The group splits up both to fend off the advance of the Empire and to connect with the Esper. Locke volunteers to sneak back into Figaro and meets Celes, an Imperial general who has switched loyalties. Sabin meets Shadow, a ninja, along with Interceptor, his dog companion, as the only one he trusts. Shadow and Sabin slip under the Empire's radar as Kefka plots an attack against Doma, the only kingdom not to embrace technology. During the attack, the castle water supply is poisoned. One of the few survivors is Kyan, a samurai guardian. The three board the Phantom train where Kyan sees his family for the final time. Shadow goes his own way, though a new friend is made, Gal, a human who lives deep within the wilderness. When everyone meets up at Narshe, Edgar insists that the leadership side with the returners as the Empire marches on the city and attacks. The returners are able to survive the battle, repelling the Empire, but Kefka makes an escape. Afterwards, Terra approaches the Esper, which causes her to transform and fly away. The returners eventually track down Terra and learn more of her secrets. That she was called to this place by the Esper, Rama, to protect her. Rama tells of the War of the Magi, a series of battles between the gods that happened 1,000 years ago. Humans who fought for the gods became Espers, users of magic. The gods realized the chaos that they had created and sealed themselves away to restore balance to the world, never to be awoken again. A second war between the Espers and humans erupted when the Magi, humans with magic abilities, tried to control the Espers' powers. As war raged on, the Espers escaped to a new realm. Eventually, the Magi were hunted down and killed by the humans, being believed to be the cause of all this chaos. Now the Empire seeks magic power. Through the use of magicite, crystals formed from the remains of fallen Espers. Rama urges Terra to take up the fight and rescue the Espers held in the Imperial capital, then turns himself into magicite to help the returners win the battle. With no ships sailing to the capital, the only hope is by air. A world-wandering gambler, Setzer, is the only man in the world to own a private airship, the Blackjack. A plan is hatched to gain access to it, where Celes, who is a dead ringer for Maria, a famous opera singer, takes her place in the show after learning of Setzer's plans to abduct the singer. The plan works, only after Locke manages to trick the gambler with a two-headed coin. The Blackjack heads for the capital city of Vector and the Magitech Research Center, where Kefka's plans of reviving the gods of ages past is overheard. At the center, Sid, the Imperial Magicite researcher, warns Celes that rumors swirl about her being an imposter, and always on the side of the Empire. More about Terra's past is revealed through a Magicite shard that was once her father. Terra's mother, a human, crossed over into the Esper realm and stayed there to raise her until the Empire attacked and brought her here. Underpowered against the Empire, the returners decide to open the gateway and ask the Espers for help. The show of power from the Espers makes the Emperor, Gestahl, realize his mistakes and offers a truce. Terra, Locke, and the members of the Empire depart to find the remaining Espers and tell them about the end of war. Along the way, they reach an isolated town, Thamasa, where residents Strago and Realm reveal that some Magi survived 1,000 years ago and sought to live a quiet life without having their powers known. Strago offers his abilities to help find the other Espers. At the gateway, Kefka ignores the Emperor's decree and kills as many Espers as he can, collecting their magicite and increasing his power. Once inside the Esper realm, he uses the power of the gods to raise the floating continent. The battle continues in the sky, leading to the ultimate confrontation, where Kefka, now fully mad in his quest for power, causes the end of the world. In the aftermath, Kefka proclaims himself the god of magic, erecting a giant tower in his honor. The returners scatter about the world, only to reunite for one final battle to bring balance back to the world of ruin.
Okay, kid, show me what you got. Yeah, right. Next! Yes! Next!
Ooh, scary.
Next! Next! Next!
Final Fantasy III. Do you have what it takes? Final Fantasy III from Squaresoft.
Next!
When Final Fantasy VI was released on April 2, 1994, nearly a year and a half had gone by since the last adventure. 1993 and 94 were filled with great titles, many of which are still remembered today. But Final Fantasy VI was fortunate enough to be positioned at a time when few competitive games were on the shelves. The only other RPG released in the same window was Shin Megami Tensei 2, while Super Metroid, the only game to come close in sales numbers, debuted a few weeks beforehand. In February 1994, news of the game went public. A near-completed version was revealed that showed detailed screenshots with 3 character profiles, more than enough to satisfy anyone who waited over a year for a new Final Fantasy. With an official announcement made and the release date set in stone, 6 went straight to the top of Famitsu Magazine's Most Wanted charts, with readers casting their votes week after week. More news was printed in March, explaining the game in detail, but still keeping the best parts secret. Along with all the media coverage, Square ran its own campaign, where each character received his or her own full-page ad with a detailed profile and sketch by Yoshitaka Amano. To coincide with the release, merchandise went on sale. Stickers, postcards, and CD singles of different characters' themes from the game were available before April 2nd. Square re-released the 8-bit Final Fantasy I and II in a single cartridge at the end of February. The first Final Fantasy anime OVA was released just 2 weeks before the debut of 6. Legends of the Crystals followed the events of 5, centuries after the game's story had ended. All of it helped to usher in the most anticipated game of 1994. Famitsu Magazine gave Final Fantasy VI a score of 37 out of 40, with 2 reviewers issuing perfect 10s, resulting in the highest rating Famitsu gave to any game in 1994. The review stated that the game was an elaborate production that always keeps the player's attention. Both the production and story are better than the previous games, and that the final result is perfect. When April 2nd arrived, Final Fantasy VI went on sale at a price of 11,400 yen, about $110 US. The game sold close to 300,000 units on opening day, selling out nationwide. Final Fantasy VI topped the charts right from the start and stayed there throughout the year, becoming the best-selling Japanese video game of 1994. 6 eventually sold 2.5 million lifetime units on the Super Famicom, becoming the best-selling Final Fantasy game so far and the 7th best-selling Super Famicom game of all time. While Final Fantasy VI was enjoying success in the land of the rising sun, news began to travel across the sea. In the US, only 2 of the 5 previous games in the series were released in English and renumbered appropriately, with Final Fantasy IV being known only as 2. There were plans to turn the Japanese 5 into the American 3, even going as far as to preview the game in Nintendo Power. As 5 was in the translation process, 6 was nearly finished, leading Square to make the switch behind the scenes. Most fans at home probably didn't notice the change made along the way, but it stands as a strange note of trivia that Final Fantasy III, as it was known, was previewed before 6, the game that 3 eventually became. The American Final Fantasy III was the first one in the series to receive a translation by a native English speaker. Ted Woolsey was given the job and created a script that stayed close to the original in some cases and felt like a different work altogether in others. Most of the names of characters and places stayed the same, with a few changes. Terra was known as Tina in Japanese. Sabin was Mash. Some spellings were changed slightly. Designs were censored for not being family-friendly. Pubs were changed to cafes, and cigarette smoking was removed. However, unlike the American Final Fantasy II, the difficulty, items, magic, and enemies are all intact. Ted took some liberties with the dialogue, adding American cultural references for music, movies, and TV shows. The departure from the original text gives a closer experience to playing Japanese RPGs, which often contain real-world references and modern-day humor. As the game was being localized, Nintendo Power did its best to promote Final Fantasy III, despite Square now fully in charge of its own releases. Previews of the game ran throughout the summer, with a release set for October 1994. When 3 went on sale, Nintendo published a 164-page strategy guide that covered the game inside and out. The book featured a full walkthrough with character guides, spell tables, maps, and wonderful artwork to accompany these pages. Elsewhere in the gaming media, Final Fantasy III received widespread coverage. Electronic Gaming Monthly and Die Hard Game Fan previewed the game extensively, often relaying information straight from imported copies of the game. After release, EGM declared Final Fantasy III Game of the Month in its October 1994 issue, with a score of 36 out of 40, stating that Square has produced a game very few will ever match, and that 3 was the new standard of role-playing games. GameFan issued a near-perfect score in their October 94 issue. The review said that Final Fantasy III was the perfect SNES RPG, the role-playing experience of a lifetime, and that the 2 years it took to make the game was worth the wait. Final Fantasy III received many year-end accolades as well, winning Best Role-Playing Game of 1994 across the board. Sales proved successful, reaching over 800,000 units during the lifetime of the Super NES, disproving that boring old saw you always hear, that RPGs just don't sell well outside of Japan.
Look. やっと会えた。ファイナルファンタジー携帯機完全移植計画、いよいよクライマックスへ。ファイナルファンタジー6アドバンスファイネストボックス当たる。
In the years that followed Final Fantasy VI, Squaresoft continued with its tried-and-true formula for success by producing and publishing a large number of role-playing, adventure, and strategy games for the Super Famicom. While the 16-bit Final Fantasy trilogy is often the most remembered from this era, from May 1994 to May 1996, Squaresoft released 15 titles, including Live Alive, Chrono Trigger, and Bahamut Lagoon, all of which received critical acclaim and sold extremely well. As for Final Fantasy, as gaming was making the jump from 2D to 3D, Square showed off the concept of Final Fantasy in 3D in August 1995. Officially titled Final Fantasy VI The Interactive CG Game, this short demo featured Terra, Locke, and Shadow in a series of battles. Video of the game in action was later released, but the demo itself has been lost to time. Like many projects in the earliest stages, many of these ideas were not set in stone, while few remnants survive today. With this demo, the rumor mill went into overdrive, assuming that the next Final Fantasy was underway and would appear on the then yet-to-be-released Nintendo 64. In the early days of 1996, Square announced that Final Fantasy VII was indeed coming, like many expected. What followed still stands as the most shocking news in gaming history. Square parted ways with Nintendo. 7 appeared exclusively on the Sony PlayStation. The fallout led to Nintendo and Square never working together again, while the PlayStation, Final Fantasy, and role-playing games in general reached mainstream success, dominating the industry. With these achievements, combined with the power of the PlayStation, Square was able to easily re-release its older Final Fantasy games, for those who missed out on the first go-round, or just wanted to relive the old days all over again. Eventually, all of the 2D Final Fantasy games, save for number 3, were re-released on the PlayStation. Final Fantasy VI was re-released on March 11, 1999. The game was nearly the same, but a few improvements such as a dash button and quick saves were added. As well, pre-rendered opening and ending cutscenes were added to enhance the experience. The game was sold as a single disc, as well as part of a 3-disc box set containing the entire Super Famicom trilogy. These re-released games made their way to the West eventually. 6 arrived in the US in October 1999, repackaged alongside 5 and with a soundtrack CD as Final Fantasy Anthology. 6 would appear for the first time in Europe, Australia, and other areas in February 2002, though outside of the US, Anthology would feature, confusingly enough, 4 and 5. While the Square-Nintendo divorce ranks as the biggest shock in gaming history, the second biggest shock came in November 2002, when former rivals Square and Enix announced a merger to create one company, Square Enix. Among the many results of this arrangement was the fact that Square and Nintendo were in good graces once again, and as such, older Final Fantasy remakes began to arrive on the Game Boy Advance. Final Fantasy VI was the last of these, released in Japan on November 30th, 2006, and in 2007 everywhere else. The game retains the same feel as it did back in 1994, with some changes. Namely, resized graphics for the Game Boy Advance screen, along with character profiles next to spoken dialogue. New dungeons and bosses were added, while the English version received an all-new translation and restored things that were censored in 1994. Curiously enough, the Japanese version received some censorship. A scene where Celes was tortured by the Empire was removed to secure an all-ages rating. Final Fantasy VI also has the distinction of being the last Game Boy Advance game released in Japan. In 2014, Final Fantasy VI was released for iOS, Android, and Windows PCs. The new version featured more detailed graphics, auto battles, an overhead map, and in the case of mobile, touch controls. The original soundtrack was retained. This version remained on sale until July 28, 2021, when all 2D mobile Final Fantasy games were delisted to make way for the Pixel Remasters series, where the original set of 6 games were brought back to life with widescreen graphics that retained a 16-bit dot art style, complete with the option of classic or reorchestrated soundtracks, art galleries, bestiary, and a music player, as well as in-game options such as Gil and XP Boost, autosaves, and turning off encounters. Final Fantasy VI Pixel Remaster arrived on iOS, Android, and Windows PCs in February 2022, and on the Nintendo Switch and PlayStation 4 in April 2023. Despite the popularity of keeping up to date with older games, including remakes of Final Fantasy 3, 4, and 7, as well as sequels to 4, 7, 10, 12, and 13, the adventures of Terra, Locke, Edgar, and all the rest have never been given the full 3D treatment, nor did the story continue past what was seen in 1994. It may be fun, interesting, and exciting to see such things, but on the other hand, is it necessary? When you've reached perfection, maybe there is no need to go any further. Like the old saying goes, a work of art is never truly finished. A good artist simply knows when to walk away.
Super Famicom ソフト Final Fantasy VI Square。
We've reached the end, once again, and as always, thank you for staying all the way through. As the coverage of the 16-bit Final Fantasy trilogy on GTV comes to a close, it's time to finally settle the arguments over which game is the best. Many of you out there have declared Final Fantasy IV to be the best of the series, while many others prefer 6. Of course, some like 5, and others might choose any of the rest that are out there. But I think the core debate boils down to 4 versus 6. These were the 2 games we received in English during the good old days. The ones that we had the most free time to invest into, to dissect and evaluate, and very much the peak of the genre before the watershed moment, not too many years later. You don't need me to remind you of that feeling way back when, the time when RPGs were popular enough to sell, but not popular enough to know anyone else who had them, when weekends were spent with late-night runs fueled by junk food, led only by the flicker of a 13-inch TV in the darkness, straight on until the morning. It is quite easy to look at 6 on paper and on screen and declare it the best, but I would still argue that 4 was as equally groundbreaking in 1991, with an amazing story that still holds up. It's hard to break that nostalgia if you were an early adopter of the Super NES. Playing 4, maybe I should say 2, over and over again for 3 years, left an impression, one that's hard to erase. I often compare 4 and 6 to two of my favorite albums, Disintegration and Wish by The Cure. If you're a fan, I think you know where this is going. Disintegration, since its release, has often been called the best Cure album, and for some, the greatest album of all time. And since 1989, has stood as a high watermark for the band, and set a standard for the alt-rock genre. Wish came along 3 years later, equally good, but different and better in some ways, taking things in new directions while commercially outperforming its predecessor. For 30-plus years, passionate debates about which album is better still carry on. Oftentimes, the answer just boils down to your mood for that day, with no easy answer to the question. That's how I feel about 4 and 6, basically note for note. How you experience these games and how you feel about them day to day really does affect the answer. And in that way, the answer to the question, which Final Fantasy is better, 4 or 6, means that there is no answer. Each was the best one for its time, for what the team could do with it, and what they could make it be. The same goes for us at home, because the best for each time made, for us, our best times, enjoying these works and making memories from them that carry on with us forever.